Hi, I'm Benn Mac Stiofán. I'm the creator of the stories that we've been uploading for the Dunmore Druid Order. So thank you so much, everybody, for all the feedback you've given, both from Ireland and in the United States. I can't tell you what absolute pleasure it's been reading some of the comments and seeing the views that we've had. That's been just really cool. I really hoped that they would be received by an audience who would really appreciate them, and I'm happy to say that definitely happened. But it definitely has been a while since we've uploaded any other stories, and just to be honest, I just have not had the time. They really take a lot of editing work, just writing the script, compiling the different stories, and then I don't really have any sort of professional equipment for, or space for a sound studio. I mean, most of them have been literally recorded with me sitting in a closet with the door shut. I've been basically working on a coming-of-age ceremony for my son, which is going to be happening this coming Bealtaine. And we're really going all out for that. So I've been really dedicating my time to that ceremony coming up. And we're going through a lot where I'm taking him all the way from making fire on his own to how to make charcoal, to make a bloomery, to how to heat copper and tin to make bronze, and then doing a lost wax casting for his knife. And that's going to be part of the whole ceremony. So that's really the biggest reason I have not been uploading stories, recently. With all that said, before we get to the Fionn Mac Cumhail series, which is what I'm planning on doing next, I wanted to just put up a video of me talking about my perspectives on Druidry and what it means to me, and how it informs my life and my own particular opinions about it, all that stuff. So this will be the first video in that new series of just my perspectives on Druidry. So, and for this first video, I wanted to talk about the lore of Druidry. And the reason why I felt this was important is I was reading this essay, this short online essay by another Celtic pagan druid, and he was really talking about how he just didn't like Samhain because he felt like Samhain had become a circus, and that it wasn't about honoring the ancestors anymore. And I really just laughed when I read that, because I think that's totally silly, to be honest. I really do. Just because, people want to take their kids out trick-or-treating, or somebody else wants to wear, a sexy costume, how is that stopping you from honoring your ancestors? I mean, I really, really don't ever want Druidry to become, us to talk about Samhain like some Christians talk about Christmas, like, oh, it's got to be about the Lord, and it's got to be, it's got to be pure, and it's got to be, it's about the birth of the Lord and all these other things. And I mean, we can complain about those things, but that doesn't do anything for anybody. And that's what made me think so much about the lore and our study of the lore, and how it's a aspect of Druidry that we really should pay attention to, but how we pay attention to it matters. And when I talk about the lore, what I'm referring to are things like the histories, archaeology, the stories, like all the stories we just told about Lugh and the Tuatha Dé Danann, the Firbolg, how to build with wattle and daub, how to do lost wax casting. All of those things are the lore. And it's never the complete picture. The lore is never the complete picture. So the first important question I think to ask is, what are your internal motivations for actually learning the lore in Druidry? And the reason that matters is because knowledge you can either use it as a cudgel or you can use it to serve. And so when you're looking at the lore, when you're looking at the histories or the language, all these things I love, don't get me wrong. They're incredibly interesting and they've been very helpful for me in so many different ways. But when we look at the lore and we say we study something like the Laur Gawala, are you doing it because you want to prove others wrong? Or are you doing it to broaden your own understanding? And the way I tend to break this down is that there are really three modes of perception we have. And you have Olus, which is the Irish word for knowledge, facts, things that are coming from the outside and informing you. And Olus is like the sun, Imbus is like the moon, and Dawn is like the earth. So when you're studying the lore, you're learning Irish, or you're studying the Laur Gawala, or you're looking at the archaeology or the folklore, you are only engaging Olus, the intellect. And how Olus is like the sun is that it's like illuminating your day-to-day life. It is practical understanding. It is knowledge that you're gaining from the outside, that it's coming from somewhere else. It's coming from a book, it's coming from a friend, it's coming from a lecture, it's coming from the archaeological record, and that's good. You need the sun to get through your day-to-day life. You need your practical intellect to navigate what you do day to day. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's very good. That's positive. We need it. But Olus and the facts of Druidry is not a complete understanding of Druidry. It can never be a complete understanding of Druidry. It's knowledge from the outside only. And the Druids, Druidry is an oral teaching. That's how it was originally. And it's not so much so today, but we can really take a lot of knowledge from the reason they did teach things orally back then. The Druids were wise enough to know that there were certain things you shouldn't write down, because when you write them down, you, in a sense, fossilize them. Every scrap of lore you've ever seen, whether it's looking at the stories in, say, Lady Gregory's Gods and Fighting Men, or you're looking at the Laur Gawala, or you're reading something that is surviving of the folklore traditions in like Ireland or Scotland or Wales, you're still only getting a snapshot in a long river of tradition of time. And that snapshot is only given by that person in that time, in that moment. Their understanding of that story, their telling of that story, may have changed 2 years later. What they emphasize in a story may have changed 2 years later. When we dig up a sword, we can see the artwork on it. We can see how it might be related to other artwork in the same time period, or the materials used, that sort of thing. But again, it's just a snapshot in a moment of time when it was created or when it was spoken. So limiting yourself to the lore is like trying to explore a landscape, but never letting your feet leave the road. You're only going to walk where other people have walked, and if you do that, you will always be observing Druidry from afar. You'll never be in it. You're never going to leave the pathway, leave the road, and go out and explore the landscape of Druidry on your own. And I'm not trying to say that the lore isn't important, it has a certain amount of integrity to it and stability to it that's very important. But if you're only studying the lore to prove others wrong, or to justify the feeling that your practice is better than others, you're missing the point altogether. You're going to encounter, as you learn Druidry, various people who are going to use their knowledge of the lore as like a club on you. They're going to tell you that what you're doing isn't right, it's not correct, it doesn't fit with the lore, it doesn't do this and that. And there are a lot of reasons why your practice as a druid may not mesh with the lore. And in fact, sometimes it would be irresponsible for your practices to mesh with the lore, depending on where you live and the landscape that you live in. The spirits here in the Rocky Mountains do not behave like the Dee and the She. And the customs that have been used out here to interact with them are very different. So if I try to force quote unquote correct Irish ways of interacting with the She and the land spirits here and the fairy beings, it's not the right approach, and in fact it can be very bad for your interactions with these spirits, because they're like a different tribe. They got different customs. So I've had people tell me in the past, well, you should be offering this, you should be offering that, and it's like, well, that's what the tradition says, but that's not what works here. And that's what you have to look at. What's practical for you in your life and where you live. And you have to change your Druidry to honor where you live on the land and the expressions that the land uses in the spirit world. And you have to change to mesh with that. You don't try to force those traditions just because they've been written down by someone who may know everything, who may have researched their facts, who have all of the good understandings and the teaching, that they've looked at the lore, they've studied the lore, they've gone over every aspect of the lore. That doesn't mean it's going to work. So again, ask yourself, when you're studying the lore, it's one perception of intelligence that you have. And why are you learning it? What are your motivations? And if you learn something that someone else may not know, or you know something that someone else may not know, are you going to use that as a weapon against them? Are you going to try to lord it over them and beat your chest and declare that you know something that they don't? Or are you going to use it to serve them? And are you going to use it as a means of learning how to communicate with them, where they happen to be, what they happen to be doing, and just give them a broader perspective and see if it actually is workable for them and practical for them? Okay, and then there's Imbus. And Imbus is knowledge from within. Imbus is like the moon. Imbus is more of an alchemical process. Insights when we pray, when we do ceremonies, we meditate, or when we dream. That's the knowledge that's coming from in here. It's bubbling up from the cauldrons in our body. It's not being foisted on us by somebody else. It's not the leftovers of someone else's experience, even if it's your ancestors' experience. That's their experience. That may not end up being your experience, and you must honor your experience. You must honor where you are now, in the world you live in now, and the problems that you have to deal with on your own today. So when we actually finally ignore the constant tyranny of our thoughts, and we just listen, that's when Imbus can speak. You can study the lore all day, but without Imbus, you'll always have a rudimentary understanding of what it's trying to say. Always. It's armchair only. Druidry is not a mere memorization of facts. What day of the week did Kesser land in Ireland on? What skills did Parhalón introduce to his people? Where in Ireland did the Firwalach first meet the Tuatha Dé Danann? No. Imbus is the impact that the lore makes on your life. Imbus is what rises up inside of you to meet the lore. So if it's just taking in, reading, studying, and declaring the facts of how the tradition worked and how it was done, and this is what our ancestors did. Therefore that's what I'm going to do. Are you studying the lore to mimic the understanding of your ancestors? What's the use of that, really? I mean, when it really comes down to it, what's the use of that? Even then, you're seeing glimpses of what they may have thought, and it can give you insights, but only if it's met with your own imbus coming up from you to meet the lore. That's like the sun, like the moon reflecting the sun. And sometimes the moon has to turn away from the sun and be dark and go inside. It's not always full. So I would say that when you're conjuring your own imbus from inside of you, when you are shutting up your mind and you're sitting next to a river and just listening, or when you dream, or you do ceremony, or you pray, those are the times when the mind is going to let go, Olus is going to relax, and the lore is going to seep down into your body and go into your other cauldrons, and Nimbus is going to churn that for you. You won't have to think about it. You won't have to ruminate about it. You won't have to focus on it. It's just going to be there for you. And the more you cultivate the trust in your own imbus, then the more the lore is going to actually speak. The great thing about the lore, the great thing about Olus, practical knowledge, the intellect, is that it does give structure and integrity. You can almost look at the lore as like a cauldron. It gives that structure and integrity. It has that strength. But without the fire of imbus beneath it, it's just cold iron. It's just a museum piece. And it doesn't have any life on its own. It can't speak, it can't serve in any way. So these three modes of perception, the way I approach Druidry, the three modes that I try to explore it through, is again, Olus, Imbus, Dan. Olus is the cauldron, Imbus is the fire beneath the cauldron, and Dan is what we put in the cauldron to transform. Dan is what happens when Olus, external knowledge, meets Imbus, internal inspiration. Dan is the point. Dan is your gift, your offering to those around you, to the world. It is how you're meant to serve others. So if Olus is like the sun and Imbus is like the moon, Dan is like the earth. It's where everything happens. It's where we manifest our lives. It's where we actually do things. It's how it actually impacts our life. And if you get lost in Olus and the lore, you really are just going to increase your arrogance. That's typically what happens. At least that's what I've seen. If you get completely lost in Imbus, you'll become a recluse, because you're so lost in your internal drama or your internal dialogues or your internal understandings that you'll find sometimes it's uncomfortable to be around other people. And this is the side that I err on. Some people may side on the air of being external. I definitely side on the side on being a little too internal. So I know how this goes. I'm not at all putting myself above these extremes in any way, shape, or form, just to be clear. But when you marry Olus, the lore, with Imbus, then you can create Dawn. You can actually put something in the cauldron, and you can make a meal that you can serve yourself and others. So like I mentioned at the beginning about reading about this other pagan complaining that, you know, Samhain just wasn't sacred enough, and it had become this sort of spectacle of costumes and partying and drinking and all those sorts of things. You know, who cares? I mean, honestly, that is in no way going to affect how you honor your ancestors and how you conduct your ceremonies. If you want to control others with the lore, you know, you're starting off at negative. You're really just starting off at negative. And anything that you try to teach from that perspective is all it's going to do is create more dogmas. And we already have plenty of those. This is especially true when it comes to interacting with the lords and ladies of the Hollow Hills. Lou, Brigitte, Anya, Dada. They are living beings that can't be pigeonholed into a particular role. I mean, any more than anybody could pigeon you into a particular role. You know, you may say you may be a teacher, a high school teacher. That doesn't encapsulate the whole total sum of who you are. It is something that you do to make a living. It is something you may be very good at, but it's not you. If someone tried to describe you as a high school teacher, it would be so obvious that that would be just a part of who you are. And it's the same with the gods. You know, like someone like Lu, you know, Ildanach, you know, the many-skilled, the all-skilled, the one who destroys Balor in the Second Battle of Moytura, the foster son of Teal'chu. All these things are titles, and they give you a glimpse into who Lu is. But the experience of Lu is so much more than the lore that eventually, once you have created that relationship with them, the lore about Lu, how relevant should it be to you at that point? If you learn something from Lu that contradicts what the lore says, who cares what the lore says? It doesn't matter. The personal interaction you have with Lu and what he teaches you, that's where the magic is. And that's because that's life. That's your life. So to be clear, I'm not saying that the lore isn't valuable, that they shouldn't ignore it and just, you know, kind of float off into Imbus and have no structure and no anchor point there. But it's only half the battle. It's only half the story. And if you focus too much on it, it's got its own pitfalls. Just like focusing too much on Imbus has its own pitfalls. So again, I encourage you to study the lore, learn Irish, learn the stories, read, study the folklore, look at the genuine tradition, because it's beautiful, and there's so much preserved that you literally could spend 3 or 4 lifetimes, if not more, just trying to learn it all. But again, always ask yourself when you're sitting down to look at it and read it, why are you studying it? In what spirit are you going to study it? Is it to bolster your own sense of you being right and hoping to correct others and point out the inaccuracies and the things that they're doing wrong? Or are you going to use it as another thing to help you serve others, to help others improve their Druidry, improve their relationship with themselves, and improve their relationship with the earth and with the land and the Tuatha their ancestors and the she.